Alors bonjour, bienvenue à tous. Mon nom est Véronique Maltais et j'animerai ce webinaire. Avant de laisser la parole au présentateur du conférencier, j'aimerais vous donner quelques consignes d'usage. Donc, au bas de votre écran, veuillez fermer votre caméra si ce n'est pas déjà fait. Et pour activer la boîte de chat, cliquez sur l'icône bulle tout juste en bas à droite. La période de questions se fera à la toute fin de la présentation. Et finalement, j'aimerais mentionner que le webinaire est enregistré et que la présentation sera en anglais. Donc, je laisse maintenant la parole à Mathieu Bergeron.
Oui, merci Véronique. Bonjour, Mathieu Bergeron, je suis directeur de la division planification, partenariat ou opération du Centre de foresterie des Laurentides. Bienvenue à ce 4e webinaire de la 37e saison des colloques du Service canadien des forêts du CFL. La conférence d'aujourd'hui qui porte sur la mission GardeFeu, une étape essentielle dans l'adaptation aux changements climatiques, est diffusée aux intervenants du secteur forestier simultanément dans plusieurs sites à travers le Québec principalement et les autres provinces. C'est avec plaisir que je vous présente le conférencier d'aujourd'hui, M. Joshua Johnson. M. Johnson est un ancien combattant des incendies de forêt, un ancien commandant d'intervention. Il est aujourd'hui chercheur sur les incendies de forêt au Service canadien des forêts, également professeur auxiliaire à l'Université de Toronto. Ses recherches portent sur le développement d'outils de télédétection pour l'étude des propriétés physiques de la combustion et du comportement du feu, ainsi que sur l'adaptation des outils de télédétection à la gestion opérationnelle des incendies. Le Dr Johnson représente les intérêts du Canada en matière de satellites à l'échelle mondiale grâce à plusieurs rôles de leadership international. Par exemple, l'équipe de mise en œuvre des incendies, GoFC Gold, et le WG Disaster du CEOS. En 2017, M. Johnson a lancé les premiers systèmes nationaux de cartographie tactique d'urgence des feux de forêt au Canada, connus sous le nom de Torchlight. En 2018, il a été nommé chercheur principal de la mission satellitaire GardeFeu, WildFireSat en anglais. Puis en 2022, il a mené la mission jusqu'à un état de financement complet, faisant de la mission GardeFeu le premier système satellitaire opérationnel de surveillance des feux de forêt au monde, de propriété publique et construit à cet effet, avec une date de lancement prévue en 2029. Je vous souhaite un bon colloque. Je laisse maintenant la parole à M. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I have to admit, I've never heard my bio spoken out in French before, and I rather enjoyed that. I should have, well, maybe I'll use the recording of this at a later date. Good day, folks. I'm really pleased to be here with you today, and I think this will be an interesting sort of discussion because if you've ever heard me present before, you've probably heard me talk about the mission, WildFireSat, and this is a slightly different angle, but it's actually probably the real priority, the real reason behind it, which is that the mission itself is designed to support our ability to adapt to a changing climate, and in particular, a changing paradigm for fire management. So without further ado, we'll get right into it here, and I'm more than happy to answer questions at the end. There's far more to be said here that can be said in a short amount of time. But for anyone who isn't someone who just lives and breathes fire all day, every day, I think it is really important to draw attention to the fact that fire is normal. I mean, let's be fair. It's actually something that our boreal forest has adapted to in such a beautiful way that we are actually dependent on it in a lot of ways. There is no boreal forest in which we eradicate fire from it. Although I have spent my career, first half of my career as a firefighter and come from generations of firefighters, I can also tell you that each and every one of us has always been an advocate that you have to have fire on the landscape. And I think what you're going to find is that as we go through this, that theme is going to keep re-emerging with WildFireSat. But aside from that, I think it's also important for us to be mindful that fires themselves, just by being present in our environment, do have negative impacts as well. I often talk about fires as being somewhat carbon neutral in that they emit a large amount of carbon, but then they entrain a huge amount of it as they rebuild the regenerating forest. But in the short term, distributing that smoke into our atmosphere and into our communities and our cities is a negative impact. And to put that in context, it's not the sort of thing that hits the news the way that a fire hitting a town does. But inside of our economy on an annual basis, the impact of smoke on the Canadian economy can easily rise to about a $20 billion a year price tag. In 2011, a single wildfire event smoked out an oil camp, shutting down production for 3 weeks. And that event dropped our GDP for the entire quarter of the year. Not a single person was injured in that fire, and it actually never even made the news because that fire was so remote and the events at Slave Lake were happening concurrently. But if you look at it globally, recent studies have actually been able to demonstrate that wildfire smoke can be responsible for as much as 11% of childhood fatalities worldwide. And that is just an absolutely horrifying thought. And none of that even gets to the very obvious impacts of fire when we see things like Fort McMurray and the recurring events in the interior of BC, and not to say anything about, our partners to the south. But you can't say every fire is a disaster. That'd be like saying every single rainfall's a flood, and that just ain't true. But there sure is an awful lot of fire. I'm not sure if this animation is going to carry too well. Oh yeah, maybe it'll cycle through for you. If you actually look at how much fire occurs in our globe, I would challenge you to find a single day of the year, any year. You pick your year. Find me one day where somewhere on Earth there wasn't a wildfire, because there is. They're everywhere. On an annual basis, we typically estimate that an area roughly the size of India burns every single year. In the new updated emissions database, this GFED thing that we maintain globally, they've started to finally properly account for small-scale agricultural burning inside of that. And the effect is that we're now starting to estimate that the global area burned annually could be as large as Australia. It's a lot of land. It's not all forests. A lot of it's grasslands. Some of those grasslands burn in the 3-month return interval, but you get the point. There's fire everywhere. Now, of course, the real issue is when the fire intersects our economy and intersects with our society. And this otherwise serene image is what Fort McMurray looked like from 20,000 feet the day after it burned. And we took that photo while we were flying to try and help them provide tactical mapping support for that event. It was one of those moments where a large number of fire researchers from CFS got called in to give a hand because, frankly, we got hit early in the year. Not all the contracts were in place for other sorts of mapping support that the province of Alberta relied on, and we did our best to give them a hand. But I think the reason that Fort Mac stands out in my head, well, there's more than a few, but one of the things is that in the aftermath of that, there were, as always, a lot of reviews. And one of the reviews from MNP very clearly laid out that there were two things that were missing in that event, but which actually have connotations nationally. One was that there was these infrared mapping tools, those overnight tactical mapping tools, were not contracted on that early in the year. And that caused a significant sort of tactical intelligence gap in the operations. which I totally get, and that is true for Alberta. But at the time, Alberta was one of the only provinces that had standing recurring contracts for to putting companies on retainer to do that kind of mapping. And actually, the majority of provinces and territories had no access to that sort of capability. And so we responded to that actually very quickly with the Torchlight program. Totally different subject, but it allows, at least in a state of emergency or when there is one potentially imminent, for provinces and territories to access that level of mapping support from the federal government. But the other recommendation was a little bit harder. Said that, you know, all of the reviews of the Fort McMurray disaster really did rely on satellite data to forensically reconstruct what had happened. And it tells a compelling story when they did it in the reports. But they also had to point out, it's like, look, this was super useful forensically, but the overpass timing, the data latency and getting the access to it, and the lack of operational tools that are dedicated to this purpose rendered it somewhat useless in the operational realm. And so there was this need for operational fire monitoring capabilities. And it's not a need that we're blind to. In the late 80s, I remember my father coming home insisting that satellites were going to change the way they do business. And I would tell you that probably around 2002, as we started to mature the initial products from the MODIS satellite, you know, scientifically, we've been ready for over 20 years to do this. But it hasn't happened. And I'm here today talking to you folks about the first mission that is dedicated for this purpose. And we're going to get into a little bit about why. But the reality of the matter is that this is, you know, when it comes to satellite monitoring, Canada faces some very unique challenges. If you think that there's like a global community of folks like myself who really spend the majority of their days trying to gain better and better information on wildfires using public data sources, typically meteorological satellites, or ones that are designed for more sort of ecological monitoring. None of them are tactically driven. That community around 2017, last time when I was meeting with them around there, most of them were kind of raising their glasses and celebrating the fact that they had closed the geostationary satellite links all the way around the Earth. And at that point, they figured this is as good as it gets for monitoring fires. But for those of us who live up north, you know, the further away you get from the equator, those satellites stop performing properly. They're seeing through too much atmosphere. The Earth's rounding away from the satellite, and so they start to get really big pixels, and they start to blend energy and lose sensitivity, and everything falls apart. But it is one of those challenges that who gets burdened by it? Us, Russia, parts of northeastern Europe, and Alaska. And I think if you talk to anyone in the Alaskan Fire Service, there's a reason that they like to hang out with Canadians. But the truth is that there was a challenge here that arguably we had to address on our own. And now pulling this back to why this falls into the climate change side of things, and at the same time explaining a little bit more about what the mission is, you need to understand that the way we manage fire in our country, we do what the majority of industrialized nations do. It's called initial attack. We find fires extremely small. We respond to them as quickly as possible, and we try and put them out as small as possible. It's an excellent system. All right. I think when I was a ranger, Ontario was boasting something like a 96% success rate. It could have even been higher at times. But there is some flaws with that system as well. And number one is that it actually doesn't take that much of an increase in fire activity in a single day to completely overwhelm your ability to respond. And this information's been around for quite some time, but if you were to say 15% increase in fires on a single day would require you to have double your existing resources in order to keep on top of them. Well, then by the time you actually reach a 20% increase in that day, you're hitting a law of diminishing returns. There's literally not enough resources in North America to keep up. So inevitably, some fires get away. This is why in Canada we have this weird sort of relationship where 3% of fires cause 97% of the area burned. Well, the reason behind that is those are the 3 that got away. And when they got away, they just kept running. And once they start running, they're really, really hard to catch. And so this is why we've kind of prioritized the mission, the Wildfire Sat mission, towards monitoring large fires as opposed to detection. Because no matter how effective we are at fighting fires, we'll never get over that diminishing returns effect. There will never be enough firefighters. There will never be enough water bombers to catch every single fire. And under climate change, the one thing we are absolutely certain about is that fire occurrence is increasing. It's still going to be episodic. There's still going to be wet years, all right? But when it happens very, very fast. And we need to start to prepare our fire management systems for scenarios where there's a lot more large fires on the landscape. Those large fires require large numbers of resources, or they require dedicated, persistent monitoring to keep tabs on them. And so there's also another story behind this too, and that's the fact that honestly, if you're a fire manager and you're actively looking for a wildfire, satellite will never outdo you. We've gone back and we've studied this, and the truth is that when we're doing formal detection operations as fire managers, well, they tend to be looking for the small amount of smoke coming from a surface fire when it's still sub-canopy. That is not an ideal scenario for a satellite to be trying to look through, especially a satellite that gets confounded by clouds, all right? So ultimately, what we want to produce is an intelligence system that's going to be able to provide that monitoring. And now coming back to the reason that, my dad thought this was going to be the change of everything, nearly 40 years ago. And it's been about 20 years since we knew scientifically and technologically we were in a place where it could be done. Well, why is there no dedicated fire monitoring satellites out there? Truth is because some of the technology, although capable, still relied on other sort of barriers that were insurmountable, okay? The old-fashioned infrared detectors were, well, I say old-fashioned, they're still the best infrared detectors out there. They need coolers. And that means you either got to fill them with liquid nitrogen or you got to run a big mechanical cooler that will pump energy out of the detector and bring it down to insanely low temperatures, like -200 kind of temperatures. Doing that on a satellite requires so much power that a satellite capable of doing this job would be about the size of a truck. In the case of MODIS and that, some of these things are closer to a school bus size. That translates to an incredible amount of money, and it's too much money to build it for a single purpose of monitoring a single phenomenon. And so CFS has actually been working with the Canadian Space Agency and Canadian industry not too far from yourselves, actually. Folks, INO in Quebec City, the National Optics Institute, they are the providers of this technology. And the difference is that it requires virtually no power to operate the infrared detector. And when I say no power, I mean like the detector can operate on 4 watts. It's like a little tiny high energy or high efficiency Christmas light bulb, as opposed to needing a truck to power it. And so the mission actually originates from that collaboration, from some early technology demonstration that we did, and then going through CSA mounted the microsat program, and that gave us a chance to go through a phase 0, do a feasibility study of what it would look like to do this. We were able to secure funding in 2017 to pursue a phase A of the mission, which absolutely solidified that we were in a position to do this. We were short on money. Surprise. And so things kind of went into stasis throughout the pandemic, where we closed up phase A and we tried to figure out, are we going to rescope and go for just a technology demonstration mission, or are we going to deliver an operational mission? And so, you know, I think y'all know where this is headed. We did get the money in budget 2022 to upgrade this into a fully operational mission. And when I say upgrade, I mean the existing funds were there. This was the money to top up, to solidify what we needed for the space segment, and at the same time provide full funding to provide all of the ground stations and the downlinking that's required to operate it, to do all of the science maturation, the product development, and to host the system so that we can actually operate it, as well as a significant amount of funding for knowledge exchange with our fire managers in the provinces and territories, and to contribute to their preparations for the mission and the influx of new data in the years to come. No pressure, right? So anyway, what is the actual premise then? Well, straight up, the premise is that if you build a satellite like WildfireSat in just precisely the right way, you can provide unprecedented strategic intelligence on all active wildfires, and we can do it in near real time. And when I say near real time, I mean like almost immediately after the satellite overpasses. I don't mean persistently, like 24/7 every second of the day. It will provide information twice a day at very critical moments, and it'll provide the right information. And now to that bigger question about smoke and how it impacts our society. Well, the type of data we're collecting will have that instantaneous value to fire management. It will also provide all of the information you need to improve the smoke products, the smoke modeling, and the smoke forecasting. And then if you do the two of those things together, well, then realistically, we can provide all the information necessary to prioritize resources correctly, and if we're fortunate, actually significantly reduce the risks associated with these types of events. Now, before I carry on, I do want to stress with everyone, these beautiful photos, beautiful, terrible photos that we see in the bottom here, WildfireSat's not intended to produce beautiful imagery. It is intended to provide automated value-added analysis of the wildfires much closer to what you see on the right. And the reason for that is that it's one latency to get the data to the ground fast enough. There's another latency of receiving information, ingesting it, interpreting it, and making a decision based on it. So we're trying to compress all of that time lag. So how's it work? All right, well, now we're going to get into the more of the simple, lighthearted, fun explanation of how this actually happens. So I told you that geostationary satellites don't work up here. We do get great data from polar orbiting satellites. These are satellites that kind of stay at a fixed time of day and just cycle over the poles. So they rise, depends on which node they have set up, but they would rise at, say, 10 in the morning, and they would come down at 10 at night. And if you actually look, because all these are general purpose satellites, they tend to go when the atmosphere is clearest, when the solar angles are the most consistent. They tend to overpass around 10 in the morning, around noon, maybe 1 in the afternoon. The problem is that is decoupled with when fires are really, getting into trouble with us, right? Wildfires tend to wake up in the morning. They're a little lazy. Around noon, they start to pick up steam. And then that late afternoon period, they are on a tear. And then as the sun starts to set and the wind starts to slow down, they do tend to take a nap overnight. That's not a hard and fast rule anymore. Unfortunately, we are seeing more and more aggressive fire activity overnight. But you kind of get the trend. If you were to look at the peak fire intensity across our country, it will be in that peak burn period. It will be somewhere around dinner time. And it'll be precisely where there's no current data available from satellites. And so that's where WildfireSat's going. It's going straight there in that peak burn period, likely around 1800. It'll have a sympathetic overpass at 6 in the morning as well, which we will make great use of. And the reason that we've done this is we are also going to form what's called a virtual constellation with some NASA and NOAA satellites. And in particular, I'm talking about VIRS. So VIRS is one of these general purpose systems, but it has some outstanding wildfire data from it. It's just the wrong time of day. So the WildfireSat system itself will have nearly identical sort of data look and feel, like the same sort of resolutions, the same sort of bands, but it'll be positioned several hours later. And the time in between them is the time in that peak burn period. And so you're not just mapping hotspots and measuring the energy released from those hotspots, perimeters or whatever. You are actually being able to look at how much the fires have changed during that most critical burning period of the day. And that gives you some very cool things that you can do. And we'll get into that in a moment. But when I said that there is a very nice reason to put it in this orbit, well, if we get the data produced in that near real-time window, we can give it to our fire managers in a very timely fashion. And this is a broad sort of description across 13 fire management agencies, but typically there is a decision point towards the end of the day, the end of the response period, where you're taking stock of everything that happened during the peak burn period. And usually trying to decide where you're going to pre-position your air tankers, your resources for the next burn period. We will give them comprehensive intel on all those fires right at that moment. And then in the morning, when you come in and you start to mobilize things and take, reassess your plan that you made last night and implement it, well, that's happening right around the time that we're giving a second report on whether or not those fires, were behaving themselves and staying in bed all night, or if they're out wandering about. So we give you that second sort of look right then and there. And I know you could say, well, it would be great to have the information all the way through the day, and it would be, except it is difficult to ingest strategic intelligence continuously. There is a period of the day where you have to respond and act. You can always receive new detection reports and you can always respond in that way, but you have to have time in there where you're executing a plan. You can't always change plans. Just quickly, and I don't want to dwell too long because I started nattering at the front end here, but when I say the data is very similar to VIRS, it is. Structurally, you're talking about thermal data with some visible bands that'll help support it. Visible bands are about twice as fine of a resolution as the thermal ones. But really, the products are what we care about. And then designing the specifications of the mission requirements can actually be directly traced to fire management requirements, which is a really cool thing that kind of only happens in this mission. But the products themselves are broken into 3 tiers. And the tier 1, this is just fundamental. We're taking Earth observation data of fires, converting it into fire detection, characterization, measuring the energy release, binning them into pixels that are all from the exact same sort of event. In tier 2, that's where that virtual constellation with VIRS comes into play. We merge the data, and when we merge that data together, It enables us to do change detection in that afternoon. It actually enables us to start describing the fire behavior in the peak burn period. And then tier 3 is where we start to break away from wildfire sat exclusively and Earth observation exclusively and bring in those static data layers and bring in our modeling groups. I think a lot of you folks know Jonathan, who's a member of our science team, and the Firehawk work, which is kind of focused as one of these sort of, near real-time fire growth modeling tools. And there's several of them across the country. We are seeking to make wildfire sat data capable of driving those models, of aiding them in executing, and even in some cases assimilating new information from the satellite. And then there's some operational stuff. These are other tools that will just basically support our fire managers in better uptaking our data, or planning how they can use it, or how they can plan their other operations around the probability of getting good wildfire sat data that day. I'm not going to get too deep into the concept of operations. What I do want you to understand is that although I always talk about this as a single satellite, it will almost certainly be a constellation of 3. And that is done to basically strip down the data and make it flawless for the purpose of fire. It removes a tremendous amount of artifacts. It ensures that you get the cleanest possible look. It may not be the detector that requires a bus to support it. It will be the detector that gets the cleanest information out of wildfires because of this. And even though they are orbiting, by the way, in that 3 of them are offset, by the time the Earth is turning underneath them, so those 3 satellites will actually appear to be a single one. And when they do that, the time lag in between the little strips that are, like where they merge, it will be less than about 2 or 3 minutes. So it is kind of a neat little shift. Sorry. No, it'll be about 10 minutes. Either way, fire ain't going that far. It will actually cover the whole world. And that's another issue that we need to stress here. It is prioritized for the far north and for the boreal. Don't get too worried about that 12 to 18 hour return over Canada. That is if you average that entire region over a full year. And the reason that it's not just 12 hours on the dot is there's little tiny triangles that get missed down at the US border, and they get missed kind of on a, maybe once a week. This little triangle in your area will get missed, but that triangle moves every day. So you never have a blind spot in a persistent way, but it does skew our statistics on these things. So extending the mission globally is actually not really a big barrier, and that is one of the things that I'm charged with at the moment. It comes down to an awful lot of agreements that need to be in place, because other countries would need to provide their own ground stations. Yeah, that's complicated looking. I'm gonna brush over this, but basically there is a very thorough concept of operations, and if anyone is tremendously interested in this, I will gladly provide you with the document to read through. But suffice to say, this is a partnership of a number of different agencies. It involves the space agency, it involves industry, who are the manufacturers, it involves CCMEO, who is going to be driving all of our down stations, our ground stations. It also involves Environment Climate Change Canada, who are going to be receiving our products and incorporating them into their smoke modeling systems. Inside of CFS, it's going to involve the CWFIF, the framework that's led out of Northern. That's our primary conduit for sharing data. And ultimately, and most importantly, it involves our provinces and territories, our fire managers. So this is just a reminder that yes, we are 100% entrenched in the work that's going on at Northern under the emergency management strategy to rebuild the wildland fire information system into this framework. And it's actually just the perfect environment for this. So although we talk about wildfire sats separately an awful lot, for many, many users, their primary interface with it will be the wildfire information system. And just a quick nod here to our knowledge exchange work. Everything I just said, literally everything about this is meaningless if it doesn't get into operations in a meaningful way. So since the onset, we've had representatives from all the fire management agencies inside of our science team. They've now formed their own knowledge exchange working group. They're also setting up a community of practice for people who are interested in Earth observation and decision support tools and whatnot. It's led by Colin McFadden, who is one of our newest acquisitions in the CFS. And I apologize for anyone who's run into him, because that man's got a lot of energy and he will keep on coming. And we love him dearly. But as part of that energy I'm talking about, they've already gone through every single province and been able to make an assessment of how each and every one of them is prepared to ingest this information, where the weak spots are on an agency by agency basis. Internal reports have been returned to the directors, or will be imminently, to try and highlight those weaknesses. And none of that is being done as a report card to try and wag a finger at people. It's actually to make sure that we all know where we got to put in the work. And I can absolutely guarantee you that the work is being put in. In the coming years, as we progress through this, there will be a GNC program as well that is targeted at helping our end users prepare for the mission. And these are the early steps to that are going to help to bring clarity to where it is that we need to put in some effort. There's also a whole lot of work that's going to be gone into training programs. CFS is working with Canada Wildfire. We're working with a number of different partners to start developing curriculums for these types of things, as well as the CIFC training working group. So, none of this is being done in a vacuum. None of this is being done by a bunch of engineers. It is being done by a community. I've always said that my primary goal in this mission is to make sure that when we are at that launch pad, that we've got all of Canada, all of our stakeholders eagerly waiting to see what happens, eagerly waiting because they feel that this belongs to all of us. I also have always said that if that satellite blows up on the launch pad, you give me a day, all right? Give me a day. But if the satellite were to blow up on the launch pad, we as a country would be so ready for what follows next. We would be so ready to switch over to commercial data providers, or whatever mission were to follow in behind us. The maturation of our readiness as a country will be significant through this program. So just quickly, the last here, the next steps, the science maturation. I told you that we're probably a couple decades ahead on the science side of it, yes, but at the same time, it's a new satellite, it's a new paradigm. You have to renegotiate a lot of these products for that environment, for that system. You also have to take a look at, now that we, hypothetically and with simulated data, we've done plenty of work on what a virtual constellation would look like in terms of those fire behavior products. We now need to develop and operationalize them. That's no small amount of work. We are neck deep, eyeball deep in the industrial contracting process with our partners at CSA and PSPC, and that's an interesting environment to be a part of, to say the least. We're also trying to really solve this international policy side of it. If you're talking to me on other fronts, you'll probably hear that as front of mind in a lot of ways. The world is watching us. Us getting this through in that budget is a rarity. It's a rarity in an extreme way. So much so that I can tell you that before our minister was briefed, the senior officials of NASA had an internal briefing about the fact that we had gotten this mission approved. So it just shows you the level of eagerness in our international community, and it's something that we want to celebrate and really ensure that Canada, really delivers on our place of leadership that we've found ourselves in. In terms of the knowledge exchange work and the putting things into operations, we're well on that path, as you've seen. And the actual operationalizing of that concept of operations is something that's in its infancy right now, but we need industry to catch up to us. So all that to say, launch date, we're targeting the winter of 2028 and getting into operations in the summer of 2029. Those timelines might seem a little bit long. If you're working for industry, they seem real slow. If you're inside government, it's going to be a fast-paced couple of years. And on that note, just a nod to our leadership team here and the science team, and I'll open it up. If anyone's got questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thanks a lot, Joshua, for your excellent presentation. It was really interesting and very well explained. Pour ceux et celles qui se sont joints tardivement à nous, je me présente Véronique Maltais et j'animerai cette période de questions. Tout juste avant de débuter, j'ai quelques consignes à vous partager cependant. Just before starting, I have a couple of information to share with participants. Donc, vous pouvez tous dès maintenant activer votre vidéo là, si vous le désirez. Et si vous désirez obtenir une attestation de formation continue, notamment en lien avec le règlement sur la formation continue obligatoire des ingénieurs forestiers du Québec, l'unique façon de procéder est vraiment de compléter l'attestation de participation avec le lien URL que vous trouverez d'ici quelques secondes dans le chat. Sachez maintenant, pour les habitués des webinaires, que le code d'activité se trouve maintenant inclus dans le lien URL. Donc, le code d'activité n'est plus nécessaire en soi, là, il est déjà inclus dans le formulaire pré-rempli. Pour poser les questions, vous pouvez le faire dans la langue officielle de votre choix, anglais ou français, sans problème. Il y a deux façons de poser votre question. Donc, verbalement, en cliquant à droite de votre nom dans la liste des participants et en sélectionnant l'icône main levée. Donc, lorsque je vous nommerai, vous n'aurez qu'à enlever votre mode sourdine en cliquant sur l'icône micro. Après avoir posé votre question, je vous demanderai, s'il vous plaît, par exemple, de vous remettre en mode sourdine. Et nous souhaitons que vous posiez une seule question à la fois, autant pour donner la chance aux conférenciers de bien répondre à votre question, mais aussi pour laisser la chance à d'autres participants de poser leurs questions. Et en deuxième option, si vous préférez poser votre question plutôt par écrit, donc vous pouvez facilement utiliser la boîte du chat. Donc, vous pouvez sélectionner l'icône en forme de bulle tout juste en bas à droite pour l'activer si ce n'est pas déjà fait. Et puis finalement, on vous demande de vous identifier clairement en donnant votre nom et aussi l'organisation que vous représentez. So the question period can now start. La période de questions peut maintenant débuter. Je vais rétablir le son pour tous, donc ça devrait être possible pour chacun d'entre vous de rétablir le son manuellement. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions? No question for the moment. Pas de question pour le moment. It was really clear.
I've never had a problem with not getting a question, but if for anyone who's out there who might have a question and not really feel like asking it here, you can find me in the NRCan address book. Just shoot me an email. I'm happy to chat there and explain as much as I can. And yeah.
Sure, thank you. We will wait a couple of seconds or minutes just to make sure that everyone is okay. Gênez-vous pas si vous avez des questions, ça peut être à travers le chat ou encore en levant votre main virtuelle. Nous avons une question dans le chat de Gilbert Nollet. Quel sera le coût pour réaliser l'entièreté du projet? So we have a question in the chat. What will be the cost to realize the project?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that the cost is fixed, so it's not going to increase from where it's at. I guess if you can put it in context of what's been published out there, in phase A, going into phase A, CSA had allocated about 54 million for the mission. Inside of the budget announcement, we added just shy of 170 million to that. So in total, over an 11-year period, you're talking about around $230 million. But I really would stress for everyone that that is not just the actual space segment. That covers the entire program through operations and downlinking and our side of it with the product development, delivering, and end user engagement, knowledge exchange, all the training courses. So it is a whole government project, and it is an end-to-end funding of a space mission, which is actually in some ways kind of a novelty on missions of this scale.
We have another question in the chat from Steve Gagnon from the provincial government. And the question is there a link with the possibility of launching rockets from Canada? I don't know if rockets is the right word to use in this case.
Yeah, I was super excited to see that actually. And so yes, for anyone who's not aware, after a lot of years of talking, they finally made the announcement that the government is going to support developing launch facilities for satellites inside of Canada, which is super exciting. I can't say at this moment whether or not WildfireSat would be launched from Canada. It really depends on the time horizon, like how long does it take to develop that capability here, and how long does it take for us to get to launch. And if they are lined up, and if our industrial partners believe that that is the optimum route for us, then it could very well be a possibility. For me, I think it would be great. I think it would be wonderful. But ultimately, it will come down to timing, cost, and that other allocation of how our industrial partners are going to roll that out. It'd be cool though.
Merci. Alors, il n'y a pas d'autres questions pour le moment dans le chat, ni de main levée. There is no other question in the chat. So, a last question from Vincent Roy. On the research side, are there university partners implicated in the project?
Yes, there are. As it stands, the way this is being rolled out, it's not like some of the normal sort of NSERC things or the Smart Earth stuff that CSA does, where they directly send grants to universities. That said, we do have partners at universities when it comes to delivering the training courses related to the mission. There will be an academic partnership there. In terms of some of the work we're doing in Tier 2, we are looking at postdoc arrangements with some of these, and also leveraging the recently created wildfire NSERC network that came under the emergency management strategy. And I should also point out that our international partners inside the science team are housed in universities as well. So we have direct correlation or direct collaborations with King's College London in the UK, as well as some of our American universities, like Maryland is an obvious example.
Thank you. There is another question in the chat from Michael Prince. Is there a plan to use the data collected for other EHO thematics?
There is, yes. So I definitely like to emphasize that this is built for a purpose. It is built for wildfire monitoring. It's capable of supporting a lot of other things. And a key example would be things like urban heat island mapping. The long wave infrared band that we have is an excellent resource to be able to support that. And it's also quite valuable that it's at an odd overpass time. The overpass time that we've chosen, there's really no reliable heat mapping data at that time for a lot of large centers. So it will give you the ability to close the loop on that sort of stuff. There's also potentially some applications in land surface temperature monitoring, again, at an odd time of day, which could support some of our meteorological services. Those talks are very early on. And then there's, the visible and near infrared bands will be capable of monitoring burn scars, and as well as other sort of general forestry applications. But I don't really promote that as a driver because I know that it will not measure up to the sort of data you would get from Sentinel-2 or Landsat. All that in mind, these sorts of things always tend to find value where we don't expect it. And so the entire data policy is open. It will comply with the Government of Canada's targets in that sense. And so the near real-time analytics on where fires are headed and that's going to be sent to fire managers. The data sets themselves, the overall stuff, will be available for public access and research. So you never know.
There is another question in the chat from Cédric Bertrand, who says, yeah, did you see the question?
Yes, I see it. Yes. So the question is about why is it a 5-year operational life? The reason is that the length of your operational cycle for the satellite really drives the cost of the whole thing. So if I were to say to you, MODIS is being put up, this big satellite that was put up around the year 2000, and it had a design life of, I think the design life was 10 years. It might have been less. It was definitely no more than 10 years. And 23 years later, it's still up there and running. When somebody builds a design life of a satellite, in terms of a government mission, what that means is that the satellite has to be guaranteed that it shall not fail within that window. And so if you guarantee the satellite will not fail in a 5-year window, that means you've built in a lot of redundancies inside the system. But it also means that if it's guaranteed, it's not like the warranty on your car, right? It's not like when you get to 105,000 kilometers, all of a sudden your transmission falls out on the highway. The system itself, we expect it to last far beyond the 5-year window. And keeping it operating at the end of that cycle is not actually a large amount of money. And so we already have discussions in place, and we've mapped out a pathway to keeping it operating beyond the 5-year window, assuming we get to that stage, and I have full confidence we shall.
Yeah, thank you. We have another question in the chat from Félix Gagnon from the provincial government. So will the data be available through a web application or map, or will it be on demand depending on the specific fires?
Yeah, that's a great question. It will be available through web applications, through the wildfire information system inside of CFS. For our provincial counterparts, for our fire managers, we will also make it available if, and this is why we want to start working together pre-launch, we can push the products directly into your internal information systems. We can work with you do that. So there's an option, there's two options there. And regarding the on-demand side of it, this is not the sort of system where you will have to do any pre-planning. You're going to get it as long as there isn't a thick cloud layer over your fire. And so it will be there on a daily basis for all targets within the country, all visible targets. And as it stands, the intention is all of those products would also be available by default. You know, whatever fire it is you are interested in, you click on it, you zoom into it, and you'll have everything. The only thing that's in question at the moment is because we have 3 or 4 separate fire growth modeling applications that could potentially be brought into play here. We haven't quite decided if one of those will be the default that gets run nationally all the time, and the other 3 would be like user preference. You would just have to determine which one you want. But that really comes down to computational logistics. But as it stands, the intent is that all fires, all the time, you'll have all the data, and you can access it through the web portal. And if you are a major consumer, if you are a fire management agency, we can work with you to push it into your own information systems if you like.
We have another question in the chat de Baptistin Bourg du Cerfo. Donc, will the raw satellite data be available to the public, such as Landsat or Sentinel, for example?
Absolutely, yes. That is basically the premise of NRCan's open data policy. It'll be housed in the Earth Observation Data Management System, EODMS at CCMEO, and it'll be made available to the public through there for whatever applications you like. The stuff that won't be made broadly publicly available will likely be more in the order of, you know, those tier 3 products, the things that are going to, you know, compare our fire behavior observations to static data layers on urban interface locations or fire growth modeling projections and stuff like that, things that could have privacy concerns and could also kind of infringe on the autonomy of our fire managers. Those products will be held back, but otherwise the raw data, the level 1B data, yes, public access for sure.
Another question in the chat, Michael Prince. Is cloud cover a challenge for wildfire monitoring?
It is. Well, it's a challenge for Earth observation as long as you're not doing radar. I mean, yes, it is a challenge. And it's one of those interesting challenges when it comes to monitoring spreading active fires. We are at least fortunate that phenomenon of increased fire activity tends to happen under clear skies. But yes, it will be a problem. And it will cause gaps. One of these operational tools that we're trying to provide fire managers so that they can make a decision on whether they want to rely on us or if they want to go and do their own reconnaissance flights for remote fires is a noon cloud forecast for all of the fires that we're tracking. And so at noon, we would issue a forecast, basically leveraging Environment Canada's forecast. We would give them all a probability of whether or not they're going to have a cloud-free overpass later in the day, and give them that as a way of allowing them to pre-plan. And that came directly out of our knowledge exchange group, believe it or not. Some of the earliest feedback we received from them was that it would be very meaningful to know ahead of time what the chances are they're going to have a clear overpass. And beyond that, we're actually working on a research project with Western University's data sciences department to try and map out the regions or how many regions of Canada do have persistent cloud biases at those times of day. whether they're in the morning with these other satellites overpass, or whether they're at our projected overpass time. And so the reason we're doing that is we want to get ahead of it and start to proactively communicate on whether or not they're your area of concern is one that is going to be persistently covered by clouds. Probably something definitely worth considering the further east you go as well.
Thank you. I also have a question. Do you think that the technology could eventually be exported to other countries in the way to expand the international collaborations?
Well, yes. Yeah, in a very serious way, yes. I'm learning a lot about these things over time. One is that the majority of space agencies actually fall under like some sort of an industrial stimulus or innovation program within countries. So there is always an appetite to put things in orbit that come from your own country. But the level of uniqueness in the detector technology is so significant that I firmly believe that as part of making this mission more broadly available globally, we are going to put ourselves in a position where Canadian industry is getting a very excellent showcase to the international markets. And I think don't forget this. This is really, really high quality infrared that requires virtually no power and is extremely small. It has excellent applications for UAV and drone activity. It has excellent applications for those high altitude pseudo satellites. There's more than just satellites that are capable of benefiting from this. And so one of the biggest things that I'm working on at the moment is trying to really solidify how much support we can provide internationally from our current constraints inside the mission, and whether or not there's partnerships out there that might help us to break through some of those constraints. But it's a little early to go into too many details.
It's great news. Thank you.
It is.
On a encore du temps pour quelques questions. Si jamais vous voulez ajouter quelque chose dans le chat. So there is no other question for the moment, so I can invite participants to communicate with you directly if other questions appear.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, sure. Donc, merci beaucoup. Thanks a lot for this presentation. En terminant, j'ai quelques messages à passer. Là. Je vous invite au prochain colloque qui aura lieu jeudi dans 2 semaines, donc le 9 février, et qui s'intitule « La notion de dépendance envers la forêt revisitée, regard sur des relations communauté-forêt au Canada dans un contexte de changement climatique ». Donc, les conférencières seront Mesdames Annie Monpetit, doctorante en sciences sociales appliquées à l'Université du Québec en Outaouais, et puis Mme Solange Nadeau, sociologue forestière au Centre de foresterie des Laurentides de Ressources naturelles Canada. Donc, finalement, j'aimerais vous inviter à surveiller nos fils Twitter et LinkedIn pour en savoir plus sur les prochains webinaires. Et je conclurai en vous remerciant vraiment tous de votre participation et en vous souhaitant une excellente fin de journée. Thanks a lot, Joshua.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.